So which choice most logically completes the text? This makes it an inference question. They always say this. I've never seen them not say this. I guess there could be something else, but they always seem to say logically completes the text. So, what we really have here is it's always the end. And if you think back to your English class, the end of a paragraph is just the concluding sentence. So these are really just concluding sentence questions. So think back to English class. What are some things that a conclusion should and should not do? Ponder. All right, so a conclusion should wrap up the paragraph, summarize what's already been said, probably tie it in with the beginning. Um, Maybe tie it in with that topic sentence. A conclusion should not bring in new ideas um, that have not been stated. So that makes this different. There's a number of differences, but I don't know. I always feel like sometimes the command of evidence I can sort of confuse it. I think we all sort of confuse it with the logical inference because they don't always have graphs. Sometimes there won't be a graph and they'll just say, like what would support the claim, but there's no graph, so it's not obviously a graph question. But here we're not supporting a claim. So here we needed to find an answer that supported the claim, but it would be some like data that maybe we didn't have, like something we didn't know, something like, oh yeah, if they did this experiment, that would support the claim, or if we found this, that would support the claim. So it's kind of new information. For logical inference, we need a conclusion that gives us nothing new. We want an answer that is upsettingly repetitive and obvious. If you find an answer choice where you're like, that is so boring because it is so obviously true based on what we already read, that's probably your answer. If you find an answer where you're like, oh, that's an interesting idea, it's probably not your answer. You don't want an interesting new idea. You want something that basically repeats probably the first sentence. So the number one thing for logically completes the text is remember it's a concluding sentence. So you want to tie it in with the beginning. This is another way in which it's very different from command of evidence, because those command of evidence questions, remember, I said, don't read the beginning. It's probably not important. It might be important, right? You take it with a grain of salt, but you want to start at the end. That was important. Total opposite here. You read the whole thing, but the beginning is often the most important because they want us to tie it in with something from the beginning, right? Because we're summarizing. Um, this is another situation where I would use that highlighter. Use your built-in highlighter, and just as you read, especially the first sentence or two, but you could do it as you read the whole thing as well, just highlight key words, key ideas. Then when you get to the end, you'll have these highlighted key words, especially from the beginning, and then you can just you'll come up with your own answer, come up with your own conclusion that ties in with those words. And then you find an answer that basically says what you already said. I really do think it's worth it to go to the trouble to come up with your own conclusion, but the highlighting feature makes it a lot easier. So we can just test that out on this. During the Renaissance, a period of great ingenuity. Okay, so this is very positive, right? Great ingenuity. My mouse is being iffy. I'll do this. Great ingenuity. Great. Artists began to use perspective in their works, adding the illusion of depth to their paintings. Differing, ooh, I like a difference from the tradition of flat-looking art. This innovation, ooh, that's like a very positive word. Because they could say, oh, it was different, but it was bad. But no, it was innovative. Made things look more realistic and three-dimensional, leading to lasting changes in the art world. Thus, scholars agree that. Okay, so we saw great ingenuity in the Renaissance, maybe in these centuries. Differing, innovation, lasting changes. Sorry. So I would come up with my own sentence. See what you can think of. So I would say something like this. The artistic ingenuity in the 15th and 16th centuries was impactful, maybe because it was different from before, or something like that. Maybe the artistic ingenuity of perspective. So I'm basically just like spitting back the keywords that I already read, focusing especially on the beginning, and then we would just find an answer that says that. Now, do you actually need to write this down? I'm kind of on the fence about that. Realistically, if you have the time, I think it's a good way to practice. I think it is good to practice by writing down or typing out your sentence. Um, After you've done that for a while, do you actually need to write it down? I don't know. Sometimes I do feel like it's pretty worth it for some questions and some students. And there is a built-in sticky note feature. I don't know if you've used that, but on Blue Book, they do have the same way you highlight. If you highlight something and then click the plus sticky note, you can actually type a note to yourself. So for some students, I do think it is worth it to actually physically write it out. But at the very, very, very least, use your highlighter. Yeah, and then you just find an answer that matches. Um, yeah, that's kind of it. And you look out for the trap answers that are in some ways kind of similar to everything else. You don't want an answer that introduces new concepts that weren't stated. You don't want an answer that differs from what you read. So